officially invited to join the inner circle of top leaders from all over the country. Listen and learn as these obsessed entrepreneurs reveal the secrets that led to their success. Welcome to the community. Today's episode starts now.
Everybody, it is Travis Helmig here, your host of the Community Podcast, and I'm really excited today because I got the pleasure to just introduce and talk with Jeff Standridge, and I have a long list of things. I'm going to try to go through them, but not all of them because the list is very long here. So Jeff serves as the Managing Director of Conductor. He also is with Innovation Junkie. He's a co-founder and managing partner of Cadron Capital Partners. He teaches at the College of Business and University, Central Arkansas. He's a retired U.S. military and also has my bucket list item, which is to become a pilot. So I really want to talk about that also. There's more things. We're going to talk about being a change agent, leadership, which is my favorite topic of all time. And so welcome, Jeff. We're really glad that you're part of the community now.
Thanks so much, Travis. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, it's going to be really good. We have a lot to talk about today, and especially when it comes to leadership, and other thing that goes with that. But first, we always kind of get into the Marvel's origin story of the person we're talking with. So, Jeff, tell us a little bit about kind of your background. Where you're born, raised, kind of how you got to the point of where you're, investing in entrepreneurial people and in tech companies. Kind of give us just the Cliff Notes version.
Sure. Grew up in rural Southwest Arkansas, a town of about 1,200 when I left there. It's probably a little more than that now. Graduated high school with 28 people in a public school. And I tell people I crammed a 4-year degree into almost 6 years at the university. I went to college on a music scholarship, instrumental music, until they realized that I wasn't particularly talented. And so then I didn't stay in the music world that long. I ended up getting a degree in healthcare. Was a paramedic and a respiratory therapist. I spent 9 years on the helicopter team at Arkansas Children's Hospital. 6 years of which I was a professor at the medical school, and that's really where I became interested in the topic of leadership. And that ended up taking me on a career evolution that led me on to buy and acquire and manage companies on 5 continents and into the entrepreneurship world that I'm in today.
Wow. And being a paramedic, man, talk about a stressful job. I did it for 6 months, but not paramedic. Got my EMT license, did it for 6 months, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. It's a hard job.
It's a hard job, and I loved it. I loved the job, but it is a hard job. Bodies don't last long lifting heavy stretchers into the backs of ambulances, and even on the helicopter team, it was a little more prestigious, kind of cool walking into hospitals, with a flight suit on. But even then, when you're a single guy, it's a great job. You get married and start trying to have kids, and it's tough.
Yeah, I can imagine. And gosh, just the mental toll. Paramedics, EMT, everybody, they just put in so many hours. And really, and then when you're like on the EMT, is what I kind of realize is when you're on the EMT side, I want to be a paramedic. Well, you have to go work, and then you have to go get hours in after work for free because you have to get those hours in, and it's just like nonstop. And they just don't get paid enough. The people
really don't.
It's so sad. And that's why I was like, I'm going to go into business because there's no way I'm making enough to do that.
And just to give you an idea here, I'm going to sound like my grandpa. We made 30 cents an hour. No, I'm, as a supervisor in an ambulance, a hospital-based ambulance service, I made $7 an hour. Now, that was years and years ago, but still, the prevailing rate at that time was for say a nurse was probably 12.
Right. So that's crazy. I did it long enough to be like, this isn't for me, but had the massive amount of respect for people that do it, because you got to be passionate about it. And if you're not, you won't do it. That's right. There's nobody in there who's like, hey, I'm in it for the money. Like, no, you're definitely not. So I'm always like, I just have massive amounts of respect for people that do it. I have a couple friends that are still EMTs, and they just love it. They love it.
Yeah, for sure.
And But you're also retired U.S. Army, right?
Army National Guard. So I spent most of my time in the Guard, and so I had a couple of different MOSs. I actually had a music MOS. I had a combat medic MOS and a respiratory specialist MOS.
Okay. Hopefully you don't have to use those any.
Exactly.
So okay, cool. Let's dive into, because the topic that I'm just gonna love to talk about, which is leadership, because I'm like, I got to put this first, because if we start talking about everything else, then I'm not going to be able to get all of their stuff leadership. So tell me about how you decided that you wanted to start like getting into leadership and you want to get your doctorate.
Sure.
Obviously you were doing the things, whether you're in the military or even being, a paramedic, like those things are, you have to be a leader to do those. No matter, you were forefront of that, but really, why did you decide to be like, I'm going to go get my doctorate in leadership?
Great question. So when I was a professor at the University of Arkansas for medical sciences, I was teaching in the cardiorespiratory program, the respiratory therapy program there.
Okay.
And we were graduating students who were very rapidly going out into the far reaches of the state of Arkansas, which is fairly rural, and were becoming shift supervisors, department directors, hospital administrators. In the healthcare world at that time, the most technically competent people were generally the ones that got tapped for leadership. But technical competence and human emotional intelligence and leadership aren't necessarily, in fact, they're quite different, right?
Right.
And so I started a course for students, graduating students in the allied health professions, respiratory therapy, paramedic, radiologic technology, nuclear medicine, et cetera, in leadership to prepare them for going out into the workforce. Fell in love with the topic of leadership. Decided to get a master's degree in adult education so that I could customize courses in leadership, and then decided a doctorate in teaching, and because I wanted to specialize in the teaching of leadership and organizational behavior, so to speak. And so just completely fell in love with the topic of leadership. For my doctoral research, I was studying the differences between top performers in the healthcare world and average performers. So what is it that differentiates a top 1% performer from the vast majority of the middle 50%? And came to realize that it had nothing to do with academic credentials. It had nothing to do with letters behind one's name, certifications, licenses, et cetera. It had to do with behavior. And that behavior could be really divided into two categories. I think about a set of scales. On one side, we have results. On the other side, we have relationships. And leadership and success is really dependent upon someone's ability to walk that tightrope between results and relationships, and to maintain some semblance of a balance between the two. Because we all have some tendency. I'm a results guy.
So you're a D. You're a big D.
Yeah, it's very easy for me to alienate the relationships. If I focus on results at the expense of relationships, I will experience wild success very, very quickly until I alienate everyone around me who's responsible for helping me maintain those results. If I focus on relationships at the expense of results, people will love me until they lose respect for me because I can't do what I say I'm going to do when I say I'm going to do it. Wow. And so I decided to just pursue that education, and that took me out of healthcare into a publicly traded company, the change agent role, and ended up spending 20 years with that company and working all over the world.
Wow. Yeah, you worked everywhere, it looks like. So when it comes to like different countries, is there a different type of leadership role dependent on the country or the area? Do you see, or is it one of those things that is really universal?
I would say 80+% of it's universal. People get the idea of results and relationships. They get the idea of, inspirational leadership, situational leadership, being led and being good followers. For the most part, there are nuances, but it's really more nuances in the words that are used, the language that's used in terms of the leadership language, not the country's language, the leadership language than it is differences in concepts.
What is so in your experience? This is so fascinating for me. So I'm like a kid in a candy store right now with all this. So are there, being like in your doctorate and just what you've seen with leadership over the years, do you feel like, I feel like it's a huge topic now, but do you feel like there's any misconceptions on what leadership is that we see from some of the big podcasters or the big people on TikTok that are like this, and this, and then you're like, that doesn't really sound like something you're going to alienate people. But are there any misconceptions that you see like in leadership?
I don't know about across all the various, podcasters and leadership experts or what have you, but I will tell you one of the common misconceptions that I heard in the company where I worked. So, leadership often gets confused with title and with position in the organization. And so I would have people come to me, younger leaders coming to me, or younger employees coming to me and saying, I want to be a leader. I want to be a leader in the company. And I would say, well, no. What I mean is I want to be a leader like you in the company, and I want to be a leader in the company. I said, well, then go be one. Start acting like one, and you will become one. And they were like, I said, so what you're saying is that you want the title and the position and whatever else comes along with that. That's what you're saying. So let's just be clear about the words you're using, because you can go be a leader when you walk outside this door right now.
Yes, I love that. I mean, and it's, I've done some consulting as far as like leadership and going in kind of change agent style. And my first 2 days there, and I'm interested when we get to this, but my first 2 days, I literally just sat and walked. Well, I sat in my office, which had I was like, I need a certain place that needs to like overlook everything, like where everyone goes. And all I did was sit, and I realized there's a consistency of what office people are going into. It wasn't the CEO, it wasn't anybody, but who everybody went to with the problem. And I had to sit her down. She's like, am I in trouble? I was like, you are in the opposite of trouble. I was like, do you know that you are running this company? And she's like, wait, no, I'm not. I was like, I've sat here for 2 days and I've watched everybody go into your office when they had a problem, when they had anything, and you're the person. And she's like, well, it's just because I like to help. I was like, no. It's way more. They trust you.
That's right.
And so it was like, you are the person running this company. And she's like, she was doing everything. And so I love that, because it's 100% true, is that you just have to be the leader. Yeah. And sometimes it was a cool thing, because she's like, she had no idea. She didn't even realize it. But it's one of those things that it's like, the title is not as important. And I've had leaders that like were bottom of the barrel, but when they stepped in the room, everybody performed, and you're like, okay, what is that about? And it's like, what do they have? And so I love that. So in your experience, like, what is the most important qualities you think a leader should have?
Authenticity.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I'm not the best at anything. Yeah. I'm good at a number of things, but I'm not the best there's always somebody out there who's going to be better than I am at something. Yeah. And so, I heard so when I moved from being a professor at a medical school over to a publicly traded company, I never will forget, I was in a meeting with the team that I now worked on, reporting to a lady who's probably number one or number two on my list of leaders that I respect. And in that meeting, I don't even remember the topic. It was probably my first 3 or 4 days there. And this was a technology company. So it was a very complex, fast-moving company. And we were talking about some kind of obstacle or something we were facing as a team. And I never will forget, she said, yeah, that's a leadership. That's a failure of leadership on my part. That's on me. I should have never done that. I'll correct that. I was 30, blown away, because I had never heard a leader be so strong and so vulnerable at the same time. That didn't happen in an academic health care setting. That didn't happen on the streets as a paramedic. That didn't happen wherever I had worked previously. And to have someone stand up, I still remember that to this day. The other thing that I remember is soon after I started working there, same leader, probably 6 months into my employment there, my father-in-law ended up having an open heart surgery and spent about 6 weeks in intensive care before he ultimately passed away. And this leader came to me and she said, look, I know that your wife is spending all of her time at the hospital 30 miles away. I know that you've got 2 young daughters that have to be gotten up and gotten ready and taken to school, and that you want to also spend time with your. I also know that you feel the need to be in this seat every single day. You go take care of your family, and we will cover for you. And at some point in the future, we're going to ask you to cover for someone else. But right now, you work when you can work. You take care of your family when you need to take care of your family. You do not have to be here every day. And just huge.
When it was setting the expectation that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Right. That's where it was like, okay, listen, this is how it works. We're gonna hold the line for you, and then you got to step on and hold the line for somebody else.
That's right.
Which is ultimate, like, leadership 101. And some people seem to have that, and some people can be taught it. I mean, you can do both, but that is an awesome quality. So I love that. I think authenticity is one of the things that's, especially when you're starting off and you're trying to be a leader, you're trying to make an impact more than be authentic. Like, you're trying to be like, okay, I have to prove myself to these people that are under me, or the way, however you're posturing yourself, I would say. But in all reality, it's like, you got to be authentic. You just got to be yourself, because that's what got you there, like in the first place. And so I love that. That's like I said, this is awesome, because is right. Everything you're saying, I'm like, I love this. Like, this is what I geek out over is this stuff. So okay, I was like writing down what is you already did this. I think when you think of an ultimate leader, who comes to mind? It was probably that lady, right? You're already literally next question. Like, we're already in sync here, Jeff.
Yeah, that's right. That it was she, and then the person to whom she reported, who I ultimately reported to. Both of those ladies they're 1 and 2, and they're jockeying back and forth for 1 and 2 position in my mind of leadership. And I haven't worked with them in 10 or 12 years, but they were transformational to my leadership. I'll tell you, there was someone else who was transformational to me, and that was someone that worked for me. And interestingly, all 3 of the most transformational people were females in my life, female leaders. But this person worked for me, and she came to me one day and knocked on my door, and she said, "May I give you some feedback?" I said, "Sure." Now, she was about 10 years my senior. I was 30, 31, 32 years old. She said, "I'd like to share with you what I'm observing. I'd like to tell you the way it makes me feel. I'd like to share the impact that it's having, and then I want to give you a chance to respond." And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
She said, "When I come in here every week for our weekly touch base," so I have weekly meetings with all of my direct reports. I've done that for years. She said, "When I come in for my weekly touch base with you, and I begin to lay out the challenges I'm having, the obstacles, the funnel, the bottlenecks, where I need some help and what have you, I begin to observe a tilting of the head, a glazing over of the eyes, and a frequent checking of the watch. It makes me feel like my job's not important. Makes me feel like I'm not a valued member of the team, and it makes me feel like I want to look for a job somewhere else. The impact it's having is I've floated my resume, and I have 2 interviews this week. Now I'd like to give you a chance to respond."
Talk about emotional intelligence, though, to set the conversation, opposed to be going in and going, "Listen, Jeff, here's what I think. You do this, you do that," opposed to like pushing that blame, opposed to being like, "Here's where I'm at. I'm going to go through 1, 2, 3. And we're after that, I'm going to give you a chance to respond, and let's see if we can correct." Like, emotional intelligence of the highest level. Well,
and I've processed that over the years, and I've built it into a lot of the leadership work that I do. I call it feedback without fallout, right? So she number one, she planned ahead, and she had an agenda. She asked my permission, right? She used I messages versus you messages. I begin to observe this. I begin to observe that versus you do this and you do that. I can argue with those. I can argue with you. I can't argue with I observe, right?
Yes.
She spoke only for herself. She didn't come in and say, "There are a lot of people who think you don't respect them," right? She didn't say that. She spoke factually, or at least observationally, right? And then she gave me a chance to respond. And that model has been something that I have used for the last 20 plus years. And again, it was not a leader that I worked for. It was one that worked for me. And she was equally influential in transforming my leadership behaviors and maturity over time.
That is, and look at the impact that conversation made. Like, you know, it's absolutely incredible. And, you know, and to be able to do it, to be able to have that emotional intelligence, to be able to have a conversation like that and not be like, it's funny when you say emotional intelligence, like you're being able to regulate yourself. That
Absolutely.
We're not going in and being emotional. We're being intelligent first, and then we're gonna, based upon the emotion we're having or what we're experiencing. And bar none, that is amazing that she could do that. But just talking about changing like the course of your, like, if you're like, I've revisited this so many times, is like, what a huge impact. Does she know how much of an impact she's made? She's made.
She ended up leaving a few years later, and she ended up divorcing and remarrying, and I lost touch with her. And I've actually looked for her to tell her that, but I haven't been able to locate her. I don't think she's active on social, and so that's been But I would
maybe she's listening, and you can tell her how much of an impact she's made on your career.
But if I come across her, I will absolutely do that. I have told those other two leaders that I spoke about. I've shared with them multiple times the impact they've had.
And so, as far as emotional intelligence, it's funny because you think you said you've had the three influential people that you've had, like they've been women, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
In your and I don't have this written down. I mean, I just thought about this. Like, do you see, as far as emotional intelligence in business and that what you worked with, do you think that women have a leg up on men on some of that?
That's a good question. Certainly in my limited view of working with executives, I think I would have to say yes. And, anecdotally and observationally, I would say yes. In terms of, really looking at it in a generalizable fashion across both populations, I don't know. I think it's a good question. Be worthy of a great study if it hadn't been done.
Yeah, I'd have to look into that because it made me think about that. We talk about it a lot, but women are always more the emotional creatures. Mm-hmm. But if they can control, I mean, we are too, but just usually it's more
like a little different. That's right.
And so that'd be interesting to look at. So I was thinking about some things about leadership and how it's changed. I know you're in the tech space, mm-hmm. Kind of dealing with that, and you've done. With the change engine, but we've had a kind of cultural shift since 2020 and the COVID and everything like that. And now everybody's working from home, right? Before, we had that leadership where you were there, you saw your leaders, you talked to them every day, or at least, in person, which is a huge thing. What do you think as far as like the change that we're going to have to see within leadership from people working from home more? Yeah. Because I know people that they're like, I'm not taking a job unless I can be remote. And that's really hard. I think when you're looking at it from a leadership standpoint, you're like, it's really hard for me to guide somebody who's not in the office. Yeah. So what do you think about that?
I think it really boils down to the culture that you create in the organization, mm-hmm. From a leadership and an individual performance perspective. So, Peter Drucker, I believe it was, that said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And you can have the best business plan, but if your culture is not where it needs to be, it will consume all of those best laid plans. So when I talk to my clients, I talk about this concept of a culture of excellence, and there are 6 elements. There's strong leadership, and what I mean by that is leaders who are committed to the core values of the organization, who understand how their actions affect the culture, who understand that every part of the organization is part of the culture of the organization. So just strong leadership, clarity and focus about what's expected and where we're going as a team, what we're trying to accomplish, and how everyone's role contributes to that clarity and focus, or to that accomplished task. Engaged and committed teammates. So, disengagement, they're saying, is one of the single greatest costs that companies will face over the next year. And disengagement is where people don't quit and leave; they quit and stay. Right? They just disengage. Yeah. And it's difficult to see disengagement when they are remote workers. It's a lot easier to see it when they're in the office every day. So strong leadership, clarity and focus, engaged and committed teammates, empowering communication. The word empower literally means to make someone stronger and more confident in dealing with the circumstances they're facing. So you can have a tough conversation with someone, but the ultimate result of that conversation needs to be one of making them more confident in dealing with the circumstances they're facing. The next one is 100% accountability. 100%. not 97%, not 98.5, but 100% accountability looks like this. When I have a task that I'm supposed to do, and I tell people I'm going to have it done by noon on Thursday, as soon as something happens prior to that, where I see I'm at risk for meeting that expectation at noon on Thursday, I immediately bring it to my leader or my teammates and say, hey, I know I committed to this on Thursday. I've had some other things happen. So is Thursday a drop dead, or can we push it till Friday or Monday? Over 50% of the time, they'll say, no, we can push it till Friday or Monday. Sometimes they'll say, no, Thursday at noon is critical. Then I have to say, well, then I need to deprioritize or de-emphasize something else so that I can do that. That's what 100% accountability does, versus waiting Friday and someone asks me and I say, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't get to it. And the sixth thing is, I mentioned Peter Drucker, Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. Another management thinker I follow is Mike Tyson, who said that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? So organizational agility or resilience is the other component of that culture of excellence. When organizations have, my experience, when organizations have those things going on, when the leaders set the expectations and effectively foster those kind of 6 elements, that results in a culture such that it really doesn't matter where people are located, because the work continues.
Yeah. So how do you feel like leadership, you've been doing this for quite some time. Do you feel like the leadership has changed? Has it evolved in any way of just better understanding, or have you seen any change in leadership since, maybe you started?
Yeah, we used to talk a lot about leadership versus management, right? And that was back big in the 80s and 90s, conversations about what's leadership and what's management. And really, people pitted them against one another, that management's bad and leadership's good. And I go back to basically, I would equate them to the results and relationships. Management is really more about the delivery of results. Leadership is the delivery of results within the context of relationships and understanding the necessity of both. And so I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's both, and that we've come to realize that you have to be able to manage the details when required, but you also have to inspire people, motivate people, lead people, and recognize that relationships and emotions are part of the equation as well. That's the biggest change I think I've seen.
What, we all learn from our failures. That's like where I'm looked at when everybody asks, and I'm like, success is the eye of the beholder. But when everyone says like, hey, how did you get to where you're at? Or when I was like, I just failed faster. I was like, I'm just going to fail more. And so we learn from that. And so I always embrace like, hey, I just tell my kids to go out and fail more than anybody else, and you'll be better. You'll go farther. So as far as within leadership, do you have any like thing that happened that you're like, oh, that was my failure that I learned from? Anything that, the listeners can maybe pull a little bit of inspiration out of your failure?
Yeah, I have what I call, I started off with the Standridge top 10 leadership lessons I learned the hard way. And then they became the Standridge dozen, then the Standridge Baker's dozen, and then the Standridge 2 dozen. And so I think probably 26 or 27 items on there. But one of them is never hire someone that you can't fire. And what I mean by that is we all want to work with our friends. And I hired a friend of mine who literally watched me grow up. He was about 15 years my senior. He was in my guard unit with me. And he watched me grow up. He was a school administrator, superintendent actually. And he also had some real strong technical chops. And so I hired him to be the technical team leader in the organization where I was working, to lead the technology training and all for software engineers, database administrators, data analysts, and what have you. And he couldn't function in that culture. He had spent a career in public schools. He could not function well in that culture. And I saw it within the first 30 days. But I didn't have the courage to step up to that. I didn't have the courage. He had literally watched me grow up. He was a great mentor and friend to me in the military. And everyone around me that worked with him and for me and with me saw that was a failure, and I couldn't deal with it. Couldn't address it. I tried to change responsibilities, but he really wasn't a cultural fit for our organization. And so I ended up taking a reassignment, a promotion and a reassignment to go to Europe for 18 months and work on mergers and acquisitions. And I left him there for someone else to deal with. And that person dealt with that. And he and I never really got the chance to talk about that again. And he ultimately passed away a few years ago. And huge, tremendous leadership failure on my part. But I've never committed that sin of leadership again.
What did you pivot? So with that, like looking back and be, okay, this is what happened. Obviously this is a failure. What have you implemented to say, okay, this is how I'm not going to do it? Is it just not hiring friends and family, or do you have like a process that you're like, that I do now to ensure that this is a cultural fit inside the business?
Yeah. So 2 or 3 different things. Number one, sometimes the best person for the job is a family member or a close friend, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But before we even start talking about potential employment, I tell them that, look, when we're at work, and you need to understand that we're going to have conversations about performance and expectations around performance. And it's going to be harder on you as a friend of mine or a family member than it is going to be on anyone else, because I have to make sure that everyone is clear that I'm not playing favorites. That's point number one. If you can't handle that, then we probably ought not explore this. Point number 2 is we're going to have a team interview, and there are going to be multiple people who are going to interview you, not just me.
Yeah.
And
good.
While I'm going to ultimately make the decision, I'm going to make the decision based upon feedback from other people. And if we don't have good, solid feedback about your goodness of fit for the role and your fit for the culture, then we're probably not going to move forward. And so those are a couple of things that I do. And then the third thing, and I do this irrespective of whom we're interviewing, is we interview for culture. So we know what our core values are. We know how our core values are best demonstrated in our work environment. And we have interview questions around those. Tell me about a time when you feel like you went the extra mile to serve the team and the organization that you work for. What was the situation? What did you do, and what was the outcome? Right. So we ask around the core values to assess cultural fit versus just hoping that they're a fit.
Yeah. I think that's definitely, I appreciate all that, because failures with friends, and in real estate, it's a little different too. So,
Sure.
When you're doing a team, you're like, listen, you close some deals, come on the team. It's great. There's not really you're kind of, you're lone wolf in a sense, unless depending on what their needs and things are. But what I found out is, we work a certain way, we do things a certain way. And we also, me and my wife, I'm definitely a lone wolf of where it's like, I've learned that my pace is not good for everybody, because I want to go. And I'm like, hey, don't ever bring a problem to me, bring a solution, even if it's the wrong solution. And so when that happens, I'm just like, well, what's going on? Why? And they're just like, and then they don't bring stuff to me. And then they don't bring stuff to me. And they feel like maybe it's because they're a friend, they stay on longer. And I've had that same situation. So I think that what I've realized, and I've kind of put my list down, is the same way, is that I have to ensure that they know that, and I have a girl right now that I'm just like, hey, I want you to go what's best for you. So don't ever feel bad about leaving, for one, and I'm not going to do that. And that's going to preserve our friendship more than anything else. Is that I'm going to support where you go, and you have to support that this may not be the best fit for us. Are you okay with that? And she's like, I'm 100% okay with that. Yep. I was like, well, then in real estate, we can do that, because it's not it's 1099, you do whatever you want, but there's still this culture of what are you guys doing for me? What are you guys doing for me? And that takes a lot of time. That's what I'm always looking return on time invested more than anything.
That's right.
In real estate, which is, I'm like, am I going to make some money off you? Yes. But it's the time that I'm gonna have to dedicate to coaching you to doing all these things. And if you don't listen, then, I still have to suffer the consequences of that, and if you do listen, so it's one of those things that I've learned that in real estate. It's a little different because it's like, when they're an employee, I mean, it's harder to get rid of somebody many times than it is to hire somebody. So yeah, that's a really great point.
There was research that was done a few years ago, quite a few years ago, that said that the drain on a leader, the leadership drain on the leader of an organization, is 10 times more from an average performer than a top performer.
Yeah.
And so, mathematically, not everyone can be a top performer, but I want my fair share of them.
Yeah. I feel like, and being a leader, it's really hard because you wear like people's success on your shoulders, and that's a hard thing to detach from, because when they're not successful or they leave the business and you're like, man, where did I go wrong? Like, oh my gosh, they're not closing deals. They're not doing anything, but I'm going through the same motions. And like, you wear that and it's hard to like detach from that. And I don't think people, when you're in a leadership position, you're always worrying about the people below you, how to make them better. Because you have to do that yourself too, with yourself, but you're always like, their success, you praise them. It's not not you. And their failures, we get blamed. And that's leadership. And you take that on, that's the role you take on being a leader. And if you can't do that, then don't be a leader. Right. And so, all right, cool. I could talk about leadership all the time. So, one book that you recommend about leadership that you just like, that's my go-to.
Gosh, there are so many out there. The Leadership Challenge, it's older.
Okay.
But by Kuzi and Posner, the Leadership Challenge was just a great book where they talked to several thousand people and said, tell me about your best leadership experience and your worst leadership experience. And they basically analyzed the commonalities of each and the differences between the two groups and came up with what they call the Leadership Practices Inventory. It's a great book, and I highly recommend it. It's interesting, the 1 Minute Manager series that was written by Kim Blanchard and Sidney Sheldon I believe Sidney Sheldon, but a number of folks there. There was a 1 Minute Manager, Leadership in the 1 Minute Manager, 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkeys. I mean, there are several in that series, and they're all written in parable form. And they are so good about describing this thing called situational leadership, which I'm really a proponent of. Situational leadership basically says that there's directing leadership, which is where I'm going to guide you and tell you exactly what to do. Then there's coaching types of leadership where I'm going to give you a little more of the decision making, but I'm going to still doing some directing. Then there's supporting leadership where I'm giving you more and more and more. And then finally there's delegating. So directing to delegating. And I might use different levels of leadership with you based upon your competence at performing whatever the project or the task is and the risk to the organization of it not being done well. And so I might be directing you in one particular set of responsibilities while I'm completely delegating to you in another set of responsibilities and everywhere else in between. And so anything on situational leadership, I think the book called Situational Leadership by Paul Hersey was the concept upon which a lot of the 1 Minute Manager series was based. But those would be the things that come to mind. They're older, but they have stood the test of time in my experience.
There's some reason that we just as humans learn from stories so much of like more than anything of like, okay. And so I love those books and those series for that. I remember being at Jimmy John's when that was a long time ago, but and that was one of the ones he's like, you have to do the 1 Minute Manager. Cool. Let's talk about, let's move over to the change agent, which is another one I want to talk to because it's a cool role. And I'm sure it was super interesting, but for people that don't know what a change agent is, if you want to explain kind of what that is.
Yeah. Since I served in that capacity, it's been kind of more formally framed up within organizations as a formal role. I actually came into Axiom Corporation, which was the publicly traded data and data management company, based upon a conversation with a guy at church who said, how's your dissertation coming? Your doctoral dissertation coming? This is when I was a professor at the University of Arkansas for medical sciences. And I said, well, dissertation's coming well. I'm finished with all my coursework. I've taken my comprehensive exam. So now I'm just working on my dissertation. And he said, well, what's your dissertation on? And I said, well, in the industry, they would describe it as competency management, but it's effectively looking at what are the differentiators of success and re-engineering kind of the company processes to cultivate those. He goes, I just came from a 2-day meeting where all we talked about was competency management and how we needed to find somebody who knew what it was. 2 days later, I'm having lunch with him. 3 days later, I'm having lunch with the CEO of the company and the number 2, and they offered me a job. They said, Jeff, we know we got to have it. We know we need it. We know we got to have it. We're just not really sure what it is. Can you come to work for us?
That's awesome.
And so I went to work there as a consultant first, and then at the end of the semester, left the university and joined them full time and spent 20 years with them. But so my role was kind of as a change agent. I was kind of a utility player. I went in and did the same research inside the company that I had done with the care world. We interviewed 35 top performers in the company. We had all the employees nominate who they thought were the rock stars. We had all the leaders in the company nominate who they thought were the rock stars. We looked at the list, and the first thing we noticed was that 80% of the list was different. So that's a problem. If how leaders define top performance and how employees define top performance is different. But we were able to look at and find 35 people on the list that were on both lists. And so I hired a couple of behavioral psychologists. We interviewed them. Tell me about a time when you were challenged beyond measure at Axiom. You were staring failure in the face, backed against the wall. What was the situation? What did you think? What did you feel? What did you say? What did you do? And we generated 125, 150 some odd success stories. We looked at all the common behaviors among all of those success stories, and we distilled those down into 34 behaviors across 8 specific competency categories. And those became the Axiom 8. The company was called Axiom. And we used that then to re-engineer how we recruited, interviewed, selected, coached, trained, compensated, and promoted employees across the company for the better part of the next 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so because I came in with that kind of background and was able to generate some early success, I kind of got pegged as a change agent in the organization. And so when we started acquiring companies, I created a merger and acquisition strategy. When we acquired 21 companies in 7 countries in Europe, they sent me there to kind of drive the integration of those companies. When they wanted to start looking at using offshore labor to support the company, I went to Poland and started a company there and grew it to 350, and then to China and did the same thing there. When they wanted to get into emerging geographies like Dubai, Saudi Arabia, North Africa, and Latin America, I went and acquired companies and managed those. So I kind of became this utility player that was constantly looking at how do we question the status quo, challenge the status quo, and how do we implement projects and processes to drive sustainable change in the organization over time. And that's what I spent the vast majority of that 20 years doing.
So when you guys would acquire these companies, would you go in and you do the exact same kind of thing that you go through? So what was like so you acquire a company, you go in day one, like what's the first thing you're doing? Yeah.
Well, so when you say the first thing in the day one, right? So there's a lot of stuff that has to be done before day one because most acquisitions fail to produce the expected return that the shareholders anticipated or the board anticipated when they agreed to do it, like 80%. And they fail for generally 2 reasons. Number one, lack of strategic fit, mismatch in culture, right? So there's a lot of work, hopefully, that's being done. And certainly what we did on the front end was we tried to make sure that we were overt about what's the strategic fit for this organization. Are we going to be able to consolidate and save money? Are we going to be able to generate revenue that we can't generate today? Do they have capabilities that are going to allow us to generate revenue more quickly? Or do they have customers that we need? Or what is the strategic fit of this organization? Why are we investing? because generally build, buy, or partner are the three ways that you look at creating strategic advantage. We've decided to buy. Why are we not building, or why are we not partnering? And we substantiate that. And then number two is what's the culture of that organization relative to our culture, and how can we assess that? And so if we pass the sniff test of strategic fit and cultural fit, okay, then it's time to start talking about, okay, how do we actually acquire and integrate this company into the fabric of our company?
How many companies do you think you turned down compared to the ones that you kind of partnered with, built?
Oh gosh, unfortunately, not enough. Probably because again, being a change agent, requires time. You change things over time, and so we learned things over time that caused us to get better at acquiring, and integrating companies and what have you. And I would say I probably did somewhere around 4 dozen acquisitions over the course of my career.
Dang. Wow. And what type of industries were they in?
So when I was employed by that company, they were in generally the marketing, data, and technology space. Software for marketing purposes, software for data management purposes, and or data. In my own personal investments, I've acquired everything from a large automotive service center to independent agencies, insurance agencies, to marketing companies, digital marketing companies, and several things in between. So,
wow, but you're like the perfect person to come in. You're like one of the sharks. I always tell people, I'm like every time I'm watching that show and they're like, no, we're not taking the offer. I'm like, take the offer. I don't care what it is. Like, you're getting in with the shark. You will figure it out. Like,
you will figure it out. That's right.
You know what I mean? Doing it by yourself. No, I'm like, no, I don't care what that would be my strategy. Like, me and my wife talk about it.
People don't understand that 100% of a pie that's this big is not nearly as lucrative as 50% of a pie this big.
Yes.
Right. And so when you take on someone like a shark, they increase the size of the pie extraordinarily, exponentially, right?
Oh man, I'm always like, no matter what, babe, we're going in there. Doesn't matter how the pitch goes, whatever they offer, we're saying yes. It doesn't matter. We'll try to negotiate back and forth, but whatever. Like, we're taking an offer. I'm getting in with Mark Cuban. It's happening.
Yeah.
Give me Mr. Wonderful. I don't care.
I don't care.
I do not care. I'm here. Let's make this happen. That's pretty cool. I mean, all that stuff we were talking about. What's been the biggest challenges you faced, during the process as far as being a change agent?
Is recognizing that with people, slow is fast and fast is slow. And what I mean by that is change is rooted in human behavior. Culture is rooted in human behavior. Human behavior both individually and human behavior collectively, teams, departments, organizations, what have you. And people don't change rapidly. And I'm a rapid fire kind of person. And so beginning to understand that with people, slow is fast and fast is slow, meaning if I try to go fast on the front end, I'm going to end up going much more slowly in terms of producing the outcome that I want. But if I can slow down a little bit on the front end, and I can make sure that I've got the right team, that we've got the right vision, the right plan, the right strategy, the right metrics, the right meeting cadence to measure our progress, and then I can move forward and I can activate my early adopters and find some other potential change agents in the organization who can carry the flag for this change initiative. And enlist those guys to help, because we know that they will influence others. Even if I can pick out some folks who might potentially be saboteurs and get them on the team and get them bought in, that they can turn that negative influence into positive influence. And then finally, if I'm willing to confront the brutal facts about how we're progressing and make changes along the way and adapt our approach based upon what we're observing, it takes longer on the front end, but it produces results much more quickly on the back end. With people, fast is slow and slow is fast.
I love, there's so much to unpack there, man. Jeff, all the stuff you're saying. I'm like, oh yes, but it's like being able to, not being set in stone of how you guys are going to do this.
Yeah.
That's like where it's like, okay, we're seeing this work out this way. Maybe we should be able to pivot instead of being like, we're doing it this way no matter what. Because you start hitting people's head against a brick wall, like they'll go the opposite way.
I would even say, yeah, for sure. And one other thing that I would say that has become very apparent to me from the world of from change management, and it's the same issue that we use in entrepreneurship and in innovation, is get crystal clear on the front end. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Mm-hmm. What generally happens in organizations is someone comes up with a great idea and then they start trying to implement their idea without stepping back and saying, what's the problem we're trying to solve, or what's the gain we're trying to generate, the problem we're trying to solve or the opportunity we're trying to seize. Because people buy for two reasons: to eliminate pain and to create gain.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so organizational change is a bit of a sales job, right? And so you have to know what the problem is the pain you're trying to eliminate, the gain you're trying to create, and be crystal clear about that, and then build a solution or a change program or what have you that specifically creates that gain or eliminates that pain.
Mm. And so, I love your mindset. I think it aligns so much with the way that I'm thinking. So this is a great conversation. So if you guys are listening, like, you might have to go back, rewind this, and write some of this stuff down, because this is all great advice. Let's dive into, I know you have like Conductor, which is based in Arkansas, but then you also have Innovation Junkie, and I've been kind of looking into some of that, which really, when I started reading about that, I was like, oh, it's all about community, of like bringing these people together. And so tell us a little bit about kind of what you guys are doing there, because it's really awesome.
Yeah. So in 2013, I was still employed as an executive with the publicly traded company I mentioned, and I was chair of the local Chamber of Commerce. We're a community about 35 miles outside of Little Rock called Conway, Arkansas. Got about 65,000 people in our community. Three institutions of higher education, a very educated workforce, a couple of large technology employers. Yet we weren't spinning out very much startup activity, not much entrepreneurship. And so I started asking the question why, as chair of the chamber, put together a group, and we studied the issue for probably 6 to 9 months, just talking to entrepreneurs, talking to people in the entrepreneurial ecosystem across our state. And it took about 3 years, but 3 years later, the University of Arkansas stepped up and created an organization. We had introduced the University of Arkansas to a group out of Northwest Arkansas, where Walmart, Bentonville, Arkansas, Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the headquarters for Walmart, Tyson, J.B. Hunt are located. There was a group there called Startup Junkie that had been doing entrepreneurial development work at that time for about 7 years. And so we formed a relationship between them and the University of Central Arkansas, which is our local university, and started looking at how can we take the work that they've done there and do it in our community. And that ultimately resulted in the founding of the Conductor in 2016. I retired from my corporate job at the age of 50 to basically walk away and create the Conductor. And we've been focused on that now for almost 8 years, be 8 years in November. Our mission is to inspire and empower innovators, entrepreneurs, and small business leaders. And we do that by basically one-on-one coaching, consulting, mentoring, what I would call a world-class portfolio of training, events, and workshops, connecting them with a subject matter expert, a network of subject matter experts pulled together from attorneys and CPAs to software developers to whomever else, and providing them access to capital, or directing them to access points for capital for their companies. In the last 8 years, we've seen about 50,000 people come through. We do about 500 one-on-one coaching engagements on an annual basis here, another 1,000 up in Northwest Arkansas with Startup Junkie. So we're one team, two different brands. Startup Junkie is the Northwest Arkansas, Conductor is the Central Arkansas. Recently, the state economic development commission, called the Arkansas Economic Development Commission, tapped us to be their technology commercialization partner for the entire state of Arkansas.
So great.
We have contracts with the U.S. Small Business Administration. We've had contracts with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And that's all funded work that the funding comes from outside sources for Arkansas-based companies, no strings attached, no invoices. Wow. Well, we started having a number of larger companies, both inside the state and outside the state and around the world, coming to us saying, we need the same kinds of stuff, but we know we don't qualify for the free services, so we'll pay you for it. And in order to keep those business models pure, so to speak, we created Innovation Junkie in January of 2020. And so we serve clients basically focused on helping them achieve sustained growth in the organization, sustained strategic growth, innovation, organizational transformation, profit growth, leadership, et cetera. That's what we focus on.
And then you guys have some cool numbers, because I saw in 2023, you guys reported that your clients had an average of 24.5% growth revenue, which is crazy. Yeah, it's crazy when you get that support of people like of those of like reaching out, and that's such. I love that. I feel like a lot, especially if you're an entrepreneur, sometimes we become lone wolves in a lot of ways, and it's like you got to reach out, and it's great that they have that support over there. And so Innovation Junkies like everywhere. So if you're like needing some help in your business, they can reach out to you, and you guys can figure out maybe something that you could do, some strategies to help them out.
That's right. We start where they are. We actually have a diagnostic called the Growth DX, a strategic growth diagnostic. They can go to innovationjunkie.com and just click on Growth DX, and they can learn a little bit about that. But it basically assesses them against about 70 some odd best in the disciplines of revenue velocity, the speed, power, and effectiveness of their sales, marketing, and messaging efforts, organizational effectiveness, operational effectiveness, leadership effectiveness, innovation readiness, digital readiness, and financial disciplines. So those 7 domains, they're able to assess their company and then put together a prescriptive plan to address those needs and whatever. We always start wherever our customers are. So, I had a coaching call with an entrepreneur just before this who she's trying to raise money. And so I gave her some feedback on her pitch deck and on the structure of her capital raise. Yesterday, I was on the phone with somebody who just needs more customers. 2 days ago, I was on the phone with somebody who needs to terminate someone, and they've never done that before. So we start where they are, and we help them, either help them solve the challenge they're facing, connect them with someone who can, or give them a tool that we think might help them as well.
Wow, you're just, what keeps you up? Like, what is the thing that like keeps you going? You know what I mean? Like what? Because I mean, you're obviously passionate about that, and that's like one thing. You're authentic, but what keeps you like? Where does that come from intrinsically? So I believe that everyone has a calling, a God-given calling, and specific gifts in order to carry out that calling. Yeah. In about 2008 or so, 2006, 2008, I was 42 years old, had about 500 people in the organization that I led in this company across 5 continents. And I asked the question, I wonder what my calling is, because I'm pretty sure I wasn't called to sell data to marketers trying to better target their consumers. So I started looking at where I was getting energy, where I was getting joy, at the end of the day, where I was being fulfilled. I was teaching an adult Sunday school class in a church at that time that I taught for almost 25 years. So I was looking at feedback that I got from them, feedback that I got from when I was speaking on leadership in various venues. And a lady said to me, "Jeff, you're a revealer." And I said, what does that mean? And she said, "It doesn't matter if I'm sitting in Sunday school, or if I'm hearing you speak at the chamber on leadership, or Mark and I are out with you and Lori for dinner. You say things that inspire and sometimes provoke me to think differently about my life, my work, my family, my home, and the intersections between those 4. Oh, gosh. And that really had an impact on me. And so I started looking at all of that feedback, plus where I was getting energy and joy and fulfillment from my work. And I realized that I was having conversations on a day-to-day basis with people that may have been focused around helping them be better at work, empowering conversations, making them stronger and more confident at dealing with the circumstances they were facing. Sometimes they had nothing to do with work. It was about career. It was about finances. It was about parenting. It was about marriage sometimes. It was about leadership.
So I spent a lot of time thinking about that and came to the belief that God specifically gifted me to create new insights that lead people to better ways of living. And when I figured out that Axiom Corporation, the company I was working for, gave me a fabulous platform to fulfill that calling while I was fulfilling my vocation, I came to realize that everyone has a calling. For some people, their vocation is their calling. My wife was a pediatric nurse practitioner. My father-in-law was a pastor. My son-in-law is a physician. They earn their their living and fulfill their vocation by also fulfilling their calling. Yeah. But for some of us, our vocation can support our calling if we can figure out the connection between the two. To do that, we've got to know what our calling is. We've got to know what our specifically gifted talents are. And then we begin to look for the connection between our vocation and our calling. And for the next 15 years or so after or 10 or 12 years, I guess, after I figured out the connection between my vocation and my calling, I went to work with a completely different attitude. It was a game changer for me.
What a cool compliment to be a revealer. Like, what is that? What a cool compliment that just took you. And I think that's kind of where I'm kind of at with, like, I was a weight loss transformation specialist for like 12 years. People that were like 300 pounds overweight. I mean, I think the most I've had someone lose was close to 300 pounds. Wow. And 100 pounds was like, it's a walk in the park. We can do this. This is easy. Organ donor transplant list, like life or death situations, and did that forever and loved it. You don't get paid very well doing it. Okay. Yeah. It's kind of like, you don't get very, so, met my wife, we got into real estate. I love real estate. And it's one of those things that it's always different. You always work with different people. It's different challenges. It's so much to learn. It's always changing, always evolving, depending on the market. But what I realized about a year and a half ago was that training mindset of getting people to the next level was what gave me energy. And real estate was one of those things that served a purpose to get me there. And so now it's like, okay, how do I take this? Whether it be like, obviously, like discipleship's a really big thing for me too, going out, doing the Great Commission, doing that, and then helping people in real estate in a way that I don't think I ever had help. Like I saw a need for that of like, you have the huge, like I remember looking at like, the big coaches that are out there and going, at the beginning, there is no way I can afford that right now. There's no way, but and so I think for me, I'm like, okay, how do we take this down to a level that's like that gives me like, because in all reality, I'm getting something out of it. Sure. Because I have my fulfillment to it. So it's not this is not about the money, obviously we want to make a business out of it, but it's also about helping people. So it's when you find those people that I always tell them it's kind of like a lawyer, right? Yeah. I want to do some pro bono work because that's what's going to give me some fulfillment also. Sure. I also want to make this make sense, right? So the wife isn't like, hey, you're wasting you're just giving all your time away. Right. So I think there's something to be said about finding where your energy, like where that level is. And a lot of times we focus on the financial piece, and sometimes we have to. Sometimes that's what's going to pay the bills, is going to keep the kids fed. But there's that point of like, it's not going to give you that ultimate happiness of what that's going to keep you going to wake up early and go, I'm excited about today. Like, who are we going to hit today?
Yeah, like, it's like Zig Ziglar once said, money's not everything, but it's reasonably close to oxygen. Yeah. But he said, money will buy you a house, but it won't buy you a home. It'll buy you a short-term relationship in terms of a transactional relationship, but it won't buy you a friend. Yeah. Right. And so people ask me, so you said you figured out the connection between your vocation and your calling, and it was a complete game changer, but you left that company. And I said, yeah, I did. I left that company, and they didn't cease to be a good platform for me to fill my calling, but a better one emerged. And so I feel like today I moved from a situation where my vocation supported my calling to where today I'm in a situation where my vocation is my calling.
Jeff, that's so good. We could end it there, but I do want to talk about your venture capitalist. And so we're talking about Cadron Capital Partners. And tell me how you guys tell me a little bit about that, how you got involved into kind of getting into venture capital.
Well, venture capital is the vast majority of venture capital is on the coast. California, Boston, New York, Austin, Texas, etc. And back when in that 2013 period that I was studying the why we weren't spinning out more startup activity, we learned that entrepreneurs really need three things. They need access to expertise in the forms of mentors, coaches, and consultants. They need access to an ecosystem a community where they can come together with other entrepreneurs, share ideas, share resources, maybe even share office space, et cetera. And then finally, they needed access to capital. And so I stepped out, recruited a couple of co-founders and said, we're going to start a venture fund called Cadron Creek Capital at the time. So the Cadron Creek is a tributary to the Arkansas River, runs into the Arkansas River just west of where we are here. And so it was just a member-managed LLC, member-managed venture fund. So we recruited 62 investors, raised about $1.5 million, and invested the average of about $100,000 in 15 different Arkansas-based companies. Up in Northwest Arkansas, the founder of Startup Junkie, who's now my business partner, Jeff Amaran, another Jeff, we're two of the Jeffs in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Arkansas. He had a venture fund called Tonic Funds, and we decided to do a fund together. And so we merged and created Cadron Capital Partners. In 2019, we created Cadron Capital Partners 1, and it moved beyond the member-managed venture fund approach to a formal VC. I think we had about, I don't remember exactly how many investors we had, but we invested in another 10 or 12 companies, and we're on Cadron Capital Partners 2 now. We're going to be somewhere around $7 million, and we're investing in, we have a preference for Arkansas. Well, we have a preference for generating positive returns for our investors, right? Yeah. That's our primary preference, because if we don't generate positive returns, there won't be a fund 3. So primary preference is generating positive return for our investors. Secondary preference is looking at Arkansas-based companies with a preferential eye toward Arkansas-based companies. But then the tertiary preference is looking for companies in the heartland, so the flyover states. I'm not saying we won't invest in a Silicon Valley company or a coastal company of some sort, but we kind of look at it in that fashion. We believe that we know that there are bargains to be had in Arkansas. We believe that there are additional bargains and know that there are additional bargains to be had in the flyover states. Valuations are not so inflated there. And the more we can do to drive the economy in the flyover states, the better our country is. And so that's kind of what we're focused on.
What companies are you guys partnering with?
Well, in terms of investing, we're generally looking at tech or tech-enabled companies, knowledge-based industries. So we first and foremost, we look at the kind of the fundamental financials of the company. If it's a software as a service or software or technology-based company, we're looking at generally about $2 million of annual revenue, 50% year-over-year growth, and a really strong management team. If it's a non-technology product and service, we try to stay away from CPG just because that's not our bailiwick. So consumer packaged goods, we're not really our bailiwick. But if it's a non-technology product or service, usually about $4 million of annual revenue is kind of what we're looking at there.
Okay.
And we're looking at companies that can generate a sizable traction into the market over the course of the next.
Do you guys do any type of investing in real estate as far as technology platforms? Have you guys had any?
Well, yeah. So I don't know if you're familiar with Arrived Homes or with Acre Trader.
Mm-mm.
So Acre Trader is based in Northwest Arkansas. We are an investor in the platform Acre Trader.
Right.
What Acre Trader basically does is they go out and they buy large pieces of farmland and timberland.
Okay.
And they then lease that back to the farm operator or the farm owner. And for every new project that they acquire, they put a new kind of special purpose investment vehicle around that. And, so they'll send out a note to their network that basically says, we have a new 800-acre soybean farm in Illinois. Here are the financials on it. Here's the cash on cash return. Here's the internal rate of return. And we're going to be having a webinar at 1:00 tomorrow. The minimum investment is $13,700. And usually by the time the webinar is over, that particular investment opportunity has been filled, and they then go out and buy that, and so they're called Acre Trader. And like I said, we are an investor in the platform company Acre Trader.
Yeah, that's a cool little platform though.
There's another concept created by an Arkansas native. It's based in Seattle, I believe. He sold his company to a Seattle firm and relocated there, and then his company was a data company at the time. But he's created a company called Arrived Homes. They do the exact same thing. It's kind of fractional ownership of single family rental properties, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so he's kind of gone that route, and two very similar concepts. One with farmland and timberland, and one with single family rental homes.
Wow. That's what is there anything you guys are looking at right now that seems interesting, like in the tech space?
A lot of AI.
When it comes to AI, are you guys doing anything yet?
A lot of AI stuff.
Yeah.
I'm personally, Cadron's not, but I'm personally investor in a company called Oxygen.ai. That's AUXIGEN, Oxygen. And so you take the word auxiliary and generative AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's cool.
What it does is it has about 20 different tools that are focused on some of the leading management thinkers, business growth thinkers around business frameworks like the Purple Cow framework or the Lean Canvas or a variety of those frameworks out there, and effectively can help entrepreneurs using generative AI apply those frameworks to their particular business in order to help them overcome some of the challenges that many business owners experience when they're trying to scale their companies.
Yeah. What do you think about AI moving forward? What's your thoughts on it?
I believe that, so I was asked this question in an investment panel one day, and I said, there's a difference between creating a URL with a .ai extension and saying that you're an AI company versus actually leveraging AI, specifically trained large language models to do the work that you're trying to do with your application, like Oxygen does for entrepreneurs and CMOs and what have you. I use AI every day and have found enormous productivity gains in using it for things that would take me hours and hours and hours to complete. I can get 80 or 90% of the way there with a well-structured prompt and query to AI and produce the output that I need. And it gets 80 to 90% there and saves me hours and hours and hours. So where I think we're going to be certainly leveraging AI, I don't think AI is going to take our jobs or people's jobs. I believe what's going to happen is people who are trained at properly using AI are going to take those jobs. Yeah. And so that's generative AI. And then there's predictive AI that's coming around the bend, where I think we're going to start seeing some real significant growth, is using AI to predict certain circumstances. It could be, so in the healthcare space, ingesting data about patients and adverse medical events that happen in hospitals and healthcare settings, and using that data of prior events to predict, okay, you have a patient here who is at risk for a medication or medication error, or a patient who's at risk for a fall, or a patient who's at risk for a hospital readmission. You need to take some extra care with them. That's one example. Clinical decision support and other forms of prescriptive or predictive AI, I think, will be the next big wave we see.
Yeah, there's just so much. I mean, that's the thing. You start throwing so much data in there, whether it's medical, like there's going to be a point where they're going to almost, AI is probably going to be able to predict what's going to happen with you in the next couple of years based upon.
I don't know about.
What's that?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I think, if they look at like the whole as they go for different generations and different things, and all the data that goes in, they're going to probably be able to throw that in the medical field and be like, this person is elevated risk because of all these other people all this data we have. And it's going to be interesting where it goes. I never really thought about it in the medical field, but I don't know where it's going to.
Very prolific. In fact, I looked at a company the other day that is starting to raise money. They have one client $2 million annual run rate, and their valuation is $100 million. And they're using predictive AI and generative AI together in the healthcare field.
Man, I mean, it's going to be just coding's going to turn into prompting. That's all it is. Sure. Who's the best prompter? Like,
that's right.
How do you prompt things? Like, it's how it's going to be. Cool. Well, I mean, honestly, we talked about, I could talk to you all day. You're just easy to talk to, very authentic. And it's honestly, it's been such a pleasure, and I've learned so much already. So we're probably going to have to bring you back on one day, because I feel like I have 50 questions more about leadership that I'm like, we've already gone an hour and 15 minutes. So I appreciate being on.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure for me and an honor to be on your podcast. And I'd be more than happy to come back anytime. I've really, really enjoyed visiting with you as well.
Awesome. Well, everybody, if you, where do they connect with you? Give them your handles.
Yeah. So very active on LinkedIn, and it's Jeff Standridge on LinkedIn, jeffstandridge.com or Jeff S at innovationjunkie.com. Any of those three, very active on all three.
Sweet. Well, everybody, we will put all of his information in the description below. So if you're looking to get a hold of him, you can go ahead and use those, and we will see you all again later. Have a blessed day.